Hi, I'm Nancy Clark.
And I'm Amory Wallace Phillips.
We're the Hospice and Bereavement Coordinators with Theo in Oxford, and this is Morning Chats with Anne Marie and Nancy. Cheers, Anne Marie.
Here's Nancy. So, today we want to talk a little bit about a topic called the myth of closure. Um, Dr. Alan Wolfelt has done some amazing work around the myth of closure, and we're going to be telling you a little bit more today about the myth of closure. This is one of the most common myths about grief is the conception of closure. In fact, the thought of grief as an end goal in grief is such a common misconception that many people have thoroughly internalized it and believe it to be a fact.
Absolutely. And, we've touched on this topic before about closure and why it is a myth, but it is so prevalent and it is such a big problem because if we don't challenge this misconception, then there are all of these hurting and grieving people walking around that are led to believe that the impossible is possible,
Yeah.
that there is a neat, orderly progression in grief that leads to kind of crossing a finish line, so to speak, and becoming free of grief and the pain that comes along with it.
Absolutely. But the reality is, so many people struggle when they find out they are unable to cross this mythical finish line. They question why haven't they reached closure and if there is something that is really wrong with them. There are a handful of reasons why people expect closure for grief. For much of our history, grief theory models have been given people the impression that grief follows a set of stages or task or lineal. So many people think grief is a finite process with a beginning and an end.
So true. Yeah.
Mhm.
There are plenty of reasons in our society that perpetuate this myth that closure is possible. So there is our need to try to put a happy face on things, even when we are suffering.
Yep.
Our lack of understanding of the role that hurt, pain, and suffering actually play in our healing process, feeling all of those feelings. Our desire for instant gratification as a society, our lack of knowledge about grief and about the need to authentically mourn,
Yep.
and also the short time frame
Yes.
that we basically arbitrarily stamp on grievers and labeling them as complicated or unresolved far too quickly and without proper consideration, and in many cases without the proper education or background to be declaring those things of
Yep.
others.
I think another point too is we are so uncomfortable sitting in grief, sitting in our own grief, let alone, other people's grief. And, that uncomfortableness could lead to the myth of, okay, closure, it's got to be all in a neat, tidy box. Well, as we know from our previous sessions, grief isn't tidy. Okay. For all too many people, closure means leaving behind grief and letting the past be in the past. And it often reflects how people around you want to move on with life. And this can lead you to deny or ignore your grief entirely. Yet, when someone dies, this inappropriate goal of closure, it's not only impossible, but it is in fact undesirable. Just think, if we so completely detached from our life losses, we would not only close the door on the pain, we would also close off our connections to and love for those that go before us.
Absolutely. So, if you are one of those people out there who have been unable to reach closure during your grief journey, there is nothing wrong with you. So, I'm going to say that again. There is nothing wrong with you.
Nothing.
Nothing. What is wrong, actually, is the goal of closure itself.
Yep.
So, the truth is that we as humans do not get over grief. There is no shutting that door. There's no tidy resolution or total sense of completion. There is no discrete endpoint. There is just a love that goes on. And so, too, along with that love is the grief.
I believe it was Queen Elizabeth who wrote a beautiful quote saying, "Grief is the price we pay for love."
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, another reason why some seek closure in grief is that they believe that grief is synonymous only with things that are distressing and painful and bad. So, experiencing the death of a loved one is a nightmare.
Yep.
So, when people hear grief never ends, they may actually understand that to be the nightmare never ends, which seems unfathomable and beyond painful to have to bear the rest of your life.
Yeah. But there is hope. When we actively mourn, taking our grief from the inside to the outside, we are working towards healing. We're moving and changing. Over time, and with the support of others, to mourn actively and regularly is to find ways to integrate the loss into our continued lives. While there is no closure, there is what Dr. Alan Wolfelt calls reconciliation.
And reconciliation is simply learning to integrate the new reality of moving forward in life without that physical presence of the person who died.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And with that reconciliation process comes a renewed sense of energy and confidence, an ability to fully acknowledge the reality of the death, and the capacity to become re involved in the activities of living.
Yeah. We also come to acknowledge that pain and grief are difficult yet necessary parts of life and living. As the experience of reconciliation unfolds, we recognize that life will be different without the presence of the person who died. At first, we realize this with our head and later come to realize it with our heart. We also realize that reconciliation is a process, not an event.
Absolutely. So the sense of loss will never completely disappear, yet it softens, and that intense pang of grief becomes less frequent. So, as we were talking about before, the concept that the nightmare never ends, that would be terrifying to a new griefer. And that really, with reconciliation, it isn't the case. But those pangs of grief do become less frequent and less painful. And hope for continued life emerges as we are able to make commitments to the future, realizing that the person who died will never be forgotten, yet knowing that one's life will and can and must move forward.
Absolutely.
So, hopefully, this gives a little bit more clarity into the concept of closure and the myths that go along with it.
Right.
So, certainly, for more information, visit v1oxford.ca, reach out to Anne Marie or myself anytime through phone or email, and follow us along on YouTube so that you can see all of our old and previous morning chat videos. Thank you.
Thank you.